Neal Lawson, thanks for joining us. What are you able to tell us about any moves in private that might be going on to try and tell the Prime Minister the time's up and that he needs to set out a timetable? That is what we're hearing from the Burnham camp that they have wanted.
Yeah, look, I think everyone knows that Keir Starmer's not going to lead the Labour Party into the next election. It's a matter of when, not if. Andy's not the kind of person who sort of bangs on the door or bangs his fist on the table and demands stuff from people. He's very kind of consensual, he's very respectful, and I think he will be that of the Prime Minister. But I think the Prime Minister can't be in any doubt that, he has to go, at some stage. And as Aubrey was saying, that ought to be done with, grace and dignity and respect. Ideally, I think, the perfect time for a handover would be around about September, as you were kind of alluding to. That would give the Prime Minister some time to do some of the things that he felt was personally important to him, any legislation or any moves that he wants to make. But it would also give, the new person coming in the time to select a team, to develop their policy agenda, to work out how they want to structure Downing Street, the Cabinet Office, how they want to deliver their programme, etc. So I think this can and ought to be, and I think probably will be, fairly orderly.
You think it's going to be orderly because Starmer and his team are still sounding very bullish. I mean, is there a move going on this afternoon with cabinet ministers talking to the Prime Minister? Is that something that you're aware of?
I've not heard whether that's happening. I think it's almost inevitable that it does. That cabinet members at the PLP, that the trade union general secretaries, that funders, donors, etc. Everyone who is a stakeholder, in the Labour Party has an interest in it, doing as well as it can, given the existential threat that it's been under. Look,
but of those groups that you mentioned, the key, structural parts of the Labour Party, how many of those are in the Burnham camp and not the Starmer camp?
Well, I mean, the torch is being passed as we talk. It has been in the last month, in Makerfield. This is going to happen. It's going to happen, in a graceful way or a non-graceful way. But it's going to happen, and it's up to the Prime Minister at the end of the day about how he wants to play it. Let's hope he plays.
But will the cabinet come out and resign eventually if
I don't
Starmer
know.
doesn't go?
You're asking me speculative questions about things, people. I don't know. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. It shouldn't come to that because again, this is against the backdrop of an existential threat to the party. Look, it just about won a lifeline, or it didn't. Andy Burnham won it a lifeline last night against all the odds. He shouldn't have won. No one should have won that. Reform should have won it. Because he has electoral gold dust, he managed to win it. There is now a lifeline. Let's not waste that with silly squabbles, and let's start putting in place the renewal of the party and the country that the electorate voted for in 2024 and obviously doesn't feel it's got. That should be the priority of everyone, a new culture of politics and a new substance of politics. And that's what the people of Makerfield voted for last night in substantial, remarkable numbers. Let's now build on that and the positives, and let's have a summer of hope and dignified transfer of power to a new leadership that can lead the party and the country effectively.
And on the substance, what are the key policy areas that Andy Burnham is looking at changing, given the fundamentals underneath of the economy, the lack of growth will still be there? Because he's talked about devolution, he's talked about his success with the bus network in Manchester, but he's got much bigger issues to try and get proper policy developed if he's going to go into number 10 on complex areas like defence and energy.
Yeah, so no one's pretending this is easy. That's why we need to get on with it and focus on that policy detail. But the thing about Burnham, and this is why I've supported him for a long time, is he gets the big picture argument that we're going to have to change our democracy and we're going to have to change the state in order to change our economy and society because it's too centralised, it's too short term and it's too adversarial. What he's done in Manchester is build a long-term consensus for change so that the public sector and the private sector are willing to invest in the long term, and then you get the fastest growing economy in the country. Now let's replicate as much of that as possible across the whole nation, so that we can get the kind of growth that's going to keep borrowing costs down, put infrastructure in place, give people a bit more hope, and a bit more optimism, and then you start dealing with not just defeating reform, at the ballot box, but you defeat the causes of reform because you've got a properly functioning progressive government. I think there is now the prospect of that, but a lot of work to be done.
And he says he is going to stay within the fiscal rules, but what does that mean for tax and spend? There's still really big complex problems on welfare. Who would you like to see go into number 11 if there is a change at the top?
No, it's not my place to name Andy Burnham or anyone else's is cabinet, but what we need to say is a different way. I mean, clearly there are other taxes that could be raised. Lots of people are now talking about wealth taxes and taxing assets as much as income. There's so much stuff that could be done. There's a repackaging of everything the government has done, which it just hasn't talked about, hasn't got a story about, can't communicate effectively. If we did the bus thing across the whole of the country, and had a £1 or £2 bus limit, cost ticket limit, that would at least lighten the load for lots of families and lots of people, and showed that we had a government that was in touch, and in tune, while we do the long-term stuff of thinking about our electoral system, social care, other wealth taxes, you name it. But it's going to have to be, it's going to be a 10-year new progressive settlement that's going to have to be put in place. That's going to have to deliver on the short term, but do the medium to long term stuff as well. And that's what Burnham at least is capable of doing. Let's get there in a dignified and graceful way.
But some might call for a move to the left. I don't want to oversimplify things because it's not that simple. But in broad terms, they might see it in that sense. Others within the party, more on the Wes Streeting camp, might say actually that's not the answer. And Andy Burnham has been seen by many as something of a political chameleon, even going back to the Blair Brown days. So he's going to have to set out and clarify who he is.
Well, look, effective political leadership is pragmatic. It isn't rigid. And the thing about Andy is that, which one of the reasons, again, why I've supported him is because he's a politician who learns. He's learned from Hillsborough. He's learned from the blood crisis. He's especially learned from being the mayor of Greater Manchester about how you build for change, how you lead people, how do you kind of do it properly emotive, politics and build long-term consensus for change. Yes, he's changed his mind on some stuff. I see that as a good thing. Yes, he's probably ended up in a more radical, if you want to term it, left-wing place, but he can't be pigeonholed that easily. He appeals to both the working class, as we saw in Makerfield last night, but he also appeals to the kind of cosmopolitan class as well. Now that's a complex web, a complex alliance that he's building and capable of building into an election-winning formula. It's not simple. Not everyone's going to get everything that they want all the time, but it is the basis of a big, broad, progressive alliance to defeat reform, but more importantly, to defeat the causes of reform.
Neal Lawson, thank you very much indeed for talking to us today. Very grateful.